the woman who waited by the shore. She came to the water long before anyone noticed her. There wasn't any reason to, at first. The beach was quiet in those days, a place where fishermen repaired their nets and children collected broken shells. She simply appeared one morning, a figure in a plain dress, carrying a chair that looked too heavy for her frame. She placed it near the edge where the sand darkened with tide and sat facing the horizon. For hours she didn't move. Some thought she was watching for a boat. Others assumed she was just another local with her own rituals. The wind was gentle then, barely enough to stir the loose strands of her hair. When the sun fell, she stood, brushed the sand from her hem, and left. The next morning, she returned, the same chair, the same quiet presence. Days folded into weeks, and she kept coming back. People began to call her the woman by the shore. She never told anyone her name. No one asked? It didn't seem right to. There was something about her stillness that discouraged curiosity. It wasn't grief she carried, at least, not the kind that shows itself through tears or trembling. It was a softer kind of weight, the kind that sits deep and doesn't beg to be seen. The sea itself seemed to understand her. It behaved differently around her chair. The waves broke slower, the foam retreated more gently, as if not to disturb her thoughts. The fishermen noticed this. They said she brought the sea calm, that on the mornings she came, the wind was kinder, the catch better. As years passed, she aged in that spot. The town changed. A small cafe opened by the rocks, then a row of new houses on the slope, but she stayed, always at the same distance from the tide. Her dress colors shifted with time, fading under salt and sun until everything she wore seemed touched by the sea. No one ever saw her cry. Even on the stormiest days, when the wind hurled spray like shards of glass, she was there, holding her shawl tight, her gaze steady on the line where sky met water. She seemed to belong to the weather itself, part of the rhythm between gust and calm. Children grew up seeing her, then bringing their own children to point her out. "She's still here," they'd say, as if she were a landmark. And she was, in a way, a marker of something enduring, even if no one could name what it was. There were stories, of course. People made them to fill the silence around her. Some said she waited for a husband lost to the sea, a sailor who promised to return before the monsoon but never did. Others believed she'd lost a child years ago, swept away by a current that carried him beyond sight. There was even a quieter story, that she had never lost anyone, but simply couldn't let go of the habit of waiting itself. The truth was, no one ever knew. She didn't speak much, and when she did, it was about ordinary things, the direction of the wind, the smell of the air, the way the tide had been stronger this season. Her voice was gentle, like seafoam pulling back over stones. Once, a traveler tried to paint her. He came every morning, setting his easel behind the dunes. But the light changed faster than he could follow, and she never seemed the same from one hour to the next. One day her hair caught the sun like glass, the next, she was a shadow against the horizon. He left without finishing. Later, his unfinished canvas hung in the cafe, just a blur of sea and wind. People said you could still feel her presence in it, even without her figure. Time slipped quietly. Her hands grew thin, her steps slower. But she came still, chair in hand, at the same hour when the tide was low and the light soft. Sometimes she brought bread to feed the birds. Sometimes she just sat, eyes half closed, as if listening to a voice no one else could hear. Then one year, a storm came unlike any before. The waves swallowed parts of the beach, and the air tasted of metal and rain. For 3 days, no one saw her. Some thought she'd finally left, gone inland to relatives. Others whispered that perhaps the sea had taken back what it had lent. When the storm cleared, the air felt oddly light. The sand was scattered with driftwood and broken shells. The cafe owner, sweeping the steps, noticed something by the rocks, her chair, half buried, the wood swollen with salt. He brought it up to higher ground and placed it near the path where she used to walk. People stopped by it as they passed, some out of habit, others out of quiet respect. A few left flowers. Children climbed onto it, unaware of what it meant, until their parents told them to get down. Weeks went by. She didn't return. Yet no one dared move the chair. It remained there through another season, and then another. The wood dried in the sun, lightened, cracked slightly. Grass began to grow around its legs. Eventually, the sea started reaching it again during high tide, washing over the lower rungs and leaving thin marks of salt. One morning, an old man came to mend a fishing net near the rocks. As he worked, he looked out to sea and thought he saw someone walking along the far edge of the sandbank, small, steady, almost shimmering in the heat. But when he blinked, the figure was gone. He didn't tell anyone. Some things are better left unnamed. The town kept growing. The cafe changed owners. Tourists came, took photographs beside the old chair, and asked who the woman had been. The locals gave different answers, depending on who was asked and what the weather was like. None of them sounded certain, but every story ended the same way, with her waiting, and the sea keeping her company. Eventually, the chair gave into years of wind and salt. One night it collapsed gently, as if it had simply grown tired. The tide carried parts of it away, scattering it along the beach. By morning, only one leg remained upright in the sand. The townspeople gathered and decided to replace it with a small wooden marker. Nothing grand, just a post with a carved line that read, "For the woman who waited." It wasn't meant as a memorial, only a gesture. Yet somehow, it changed the rhythm of the place. Visitors began to linger there longer, listening to the sea as she once had. Some said the air around that spot always felt stiller, even on windy days. Years passed, and the memory of her blurred into the rhythm of the waves. People forgot the sound of her steps, the shade of her dress, the exact curve of her chair. But every now and then, when the tide was especially calm, the older fishermen said they felt her presence, a faint warmth, like sunlight beneath the surface of the water. One of them, who had known her longest, used to say she hadn't vanished at all. She just became part of the waiting. He'd whisper, "The sea holds on to those who know how to listen." And in that, perhaps, there was a kind of truth. Because if you stood there on certain evenings, when the horizon softened and the light thinned into silver, you could almost feel that the air remembered her, the shape she made, the quiet patience she carried, the weight of all her unsent goodbyes. The sound of the tide seemed to pause for half a breath, like it was listening too. Maybe she had waited for someone who never returned. Maybe she had been waiting for herself to stop. Or maybe she'd understood something long before anyone else did, that waiting, in its purest form, isn't about what comes back, but about learning to stay until the sea inside you is still. The town never rebuilt the chair. They said the beach was better that way, open, empty, letting the wind and sea draw their own shapes in the sand. But sometimes, when the morning light hits the shore just right, the shadows make it seem like there's still a figure sitting there, quietly facing the horizon. No one goes near when that happens. They just walk slower, lower their voices, and let her have her view. And the sea, faithful as ever, keeps breathing in and out, carrying her story somewhere far beyond sight.